Hi, I'm Sophia.
I never thought a dinner reservation could ruin a decade-long relationship, or maybe I did and just never admitted it. It was supposed to be a simple family evening. My sister, Clara, made it sound like a casual get-together at a new upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with polished marble floors, soft jazz floating in the air, and wine menus thicker than a textbook. She had been going on about it for weeks in the family group chat. You know, the type of person who makes sure everyone knows she's a regular? That's Clara. Everything about her sparkled. Her laugh, her wardrobe, even her version of the truth. She wore confidence like highlighter on her cheekbones, and when she walked into a room, she expected the world to tilt in her direction. And most of the time it did. I had almost said no to the dinner.
I knew what it would be. A show.
Clara and her fiancé, Donovan, taking up half the table with their shared stories of travel, luxury, connections. My parents nodding along, my aunt making notes in her mind for who to name drop next time at her brunch. And me, just trying to breathe without drawing too much attention to the cracks they had all learned to look past. But I said yes. Maybe because some small part of me hoped things would be different this time. Or maybe because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking I had something to hide. That evening, I wore a navy dress I had pulled out from the back of my closet. Not expensive, but it fit well. My shoes were simple, my hair pulled back with a pin my grandmother had once gifted me. But it was the ring that caught Clara's eye before I even sat down. I had barely pulled the chair out when she leaned forward, squinting like she was examining something under a microscope. Her voice was a little too loud, as if she wanted everyone at the nearby tables to hear, too. She tilted her head and asked me if I had borrowed the ring from a souvenir shop. Then she laughed, a soft, cruel sound that sounded like bells dipped in poison. I felt my cheeks burn. I turned the ring inward, the stone facing my palm. It was a modest opal, set in a thin silver band. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. It had been given to me by someone who mattered, someone no longer here. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. She turned back to Donovan and continued talking about their recent trip to Vienna, their private wine tasting at some chateau I couldn't pronounce. I barely tasted my food that night. Every forkful turned heavy in my mouth. Every laugh from her lips made the table tilt farther from me. And then came the moment, the shift in the evening I didn't expect. It happened as dessert arrived. A waiter I didn't recognize at first approached the table, holding a small tray. His eyes flicked toward me, and then he smiled, not the polite, distant kind of smile you give to another stranger. No, it was the smile of someone who knew. He addressed me by name. Not Miss or Ma'am, my actual name. Soft, clear, familiar. The entire table stilled. I felt everyone's gaze shift. Clara froze with her spoon midair. The waiter placed a folded note beside my dessert, gave me a small nod, and walked away.
No explanation.
No one else at the table got anything. My father blinked, my mother's lips pressed tight, and Clara, well, she turned pale. I watched the color drain from her face like wine knocked over on a white cloth. I didn't touch the note right away. I let it sit there, a silent challenge, a question none of them dared to voice. My hand trembled only a little when I finally opened it. Inside was a name I hadn't heard in years, a name that unraveled everything I had tied shut with silence. The rest of dinner passed like a dream I couldn't wake from. Clara tried to recover, laughing too loudly, gesturing grandly, throwing Donovan into stories he clearly didn't want to be part of. But her eyes kept darting toward the note, toward me, toward that simple, cheap ring she had mocked just an hour earlier. She asked, too casually, who the waiter was. I smiled without teeth and said I didn't know. But that was a lie. I knew exactly who he was. The truth is, there are pieces of my life Clara never knew about. Not because I was hiding them, but because she never looked beyond what she wanted to see. I had once been someone else, someone different, fuller, more open. Before the collapse. Before the quiet exits and the polite lies. And before the silence that followed me like a ghost even when I smiled in family photos. That note, that waiter. That name, it cracked something open I had buried so deep I thought it would stay forgotten. But the past never forgets you, especially when you try so hard to forget it. Back home, I placed the ring on the windowsill before washing my face. I stared at it a long while, the opal catching the moonlight in quiet defiance. Clara would never understand its worth. It wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about memory. About a night years ago, when that same ring was slid onto my finger with hands that shook from nerves and love all at once. A night when promises were whispered not with diamonds, but with depth. The name in the note stirred things I thought I'd suffocated. I hadn't seen him since everything ended. The kind of end that feels like it took parts of you with it. He had left for reasons I didn't ask about, reasons that had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with timing. We were fire and paper. I burned easily, and he couldn't stand the smoke. And yet, he had found me. Or maybe he had never stopped knowing where I was. The thought frightened and comforted me at the same time. Clara's face flashed in my mind, her pale expression, her halted laughter, her uncertainty. She wasn't used to not knowing something. She wasn't used to me having a secret. The next morning, I walked the same route I had taken so many times in the past, back when things were different. My steps felt heavier now, but purposeful. I stopped in front of a little bookshop 2 blocks from the restaurant. It had changed names, changed colors, but the window still had that small crack in the bottom right corner. Just like I remembered. I stepped inside, and the chime above the door rang like an old friend remembering your name. The woman at the counter looked up and smiled. Not the same woman from before, but she gave me that look, the one people give when they know who you used to be.
She pointed toward the back.
Said someone had left a book for me. I walked between the shelves, fingers brushing spines of novels I'd once loved and forgotten. In the back, tucked between poetry and philosophy, was a brown paper-wrapped book with a single word written on the front in neat handwriting. Still, I didn't open it right away. I just held it. My throat tightened. He had once told me I reminded him of still water, calm, quiet, but impossible to measure the depth of without drowning. I had laughed then. Now I understood what he meant. I walked out into the street, the sun warming the top of my head. My phone buzzed. A message from Clara. It was a photo from dinner, a group shot, everyone smiling. I wasn't in it. I remembered stepping away for a moment when the waiter came with the bill. That photo had been taken then. Cropped, edited, framed just right. Her caption read, "Family first. Always." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because something had shifted. Not in them, in me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. The next day passed slowly, like honey dripping over cold stone. I kept glancing at the brown-wrapped book on my coffee table, but I didn't open it. It sat there like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Outside, the world moved. I could hear cars, a child laughing on a scooter, the faint bark of a dog 2 buildings away. Life going on. But inside my apartment, time hovered like dust in still air. That message from Clara stayed unread in my inbox. Another one came later that afternoon. Who was the waiter?
Just that. No puntuación. No emoji. No kainis.
I didn't reply. I went to bed early that night, but didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the silence, and when the first light crept through my blinds, I reached for the book. The wrapping came off slowly. My hands were steady, but something beneath my ribs wasn't. Inside was a thin hardback, no title on the cover. I opened it. The first page held a letter. I read it once, then twice. The third time, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. He hadn't just remembered me.
He had written about me.
A manuscript, unfinished but raw, filled with memories I didn't know had stuck with him. Pages filled with the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when nervous, how I avoided mirrors after crying, how I once sat with him through the night when his mother was in the hospital, never saying much, just breathing next to him. Every chapter was a version of me, more seen than I'd ever felt. And yet he had vanished all those years ago, without explanation. Until now. At the very end of the manuscript was a small folded note. Short, handwritten. The same penmanship as the restaurant message. You once asked if I'd ever stop disappearing. I thought I had to vanish to protect you. But I've learned that people who vanish don't protect, they leave damage. If you'll see me, I'll be at Trenton's Cafe. Tomorrow. 4 p.m. I read it over and over. I hadn't cried in years, not really. But that morning I did. Quietly, like steam slipping from a kettle, more relief than sorrow. Not because I was sure I wanted to see him again, but because I had never been given the choice before. I arrived at Trenton's Cafe 10 minutes early. It looked the same, gray brick walls, too many plants hanging from the ceiling, the faint scent of cinnamon and warm milk. I used to love that place. Now it felt like walking into a memory someone else had preserved. He was already there. Older, of course. His beard fuller, his hair a little shorter. But it was him. Same steady gaze. Same pause when he stood up, unsure if he should hug me or not. He didn't. And I didn't move. We just sat. He apologized first. Not with excuses, not with stories. Just an apology that sounded like it had been living inside him for years. He told me about what happened. His father had been ill, worse than anyone knew. He'd returned home quietly, trying to keep the business afloat, had taken a job that made him invisible, stopped writing, stopped calling, stopped existing in the ways that mattered. And he hadn't reached out, not because he stopped caring, but because he thought I deserved more than a man unraveling thread by thread. I listened. Not because I was ready to forgive, but because for once, someone was giving me truth without requiring permission to do so. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. I froze. It wasn't a ring this time. It was a key. A small, simple key with a green tag. "There's something you should see," he said quietly. I stared at it, unsure what to do. But curiosity is its own kind of gravity. That evening, I followed the address printed on the green tag. It was a gallery space. Small, tucked between a bakery and a florist, almost easy to miss. But the door opened with that key. Inside, the lights flicked on automatically. What I saw made me stop breathing for a moment. The walls were covered in sketches.
Of me.
Not portraits, exactly. But moments. Me at a cafe, head down over a book. Me laughing beside a bus stop. Me standing in the rain, blurry through a fogged window. There were dozens of them. All done in charcoal and ink, mounted carefully. And in the center of the room, beneath soft lighting, was a sculpture. Metal and stone, cold and warm at once. It was an abstract shape, but I recognized the form. The curve of a hand holding something delicate. A small replica of the very ring Clara had mocked. He had recreated it, immortalized it, not as a piece of jewelry, but as a memory. A label below it simply read, "Belonged." I didn't know how long I stood there. I didn't touch anything. I didn't move until my phone buzzed again. Clara. Her message this time was sharper. "I know something's going on. Did you plan that whole thing at the restaurant?
Who was that guy?
Why are people messaging me asking about you? What are you hiding?" I didn't reply, but I knew what she meant. People had started talking. The restaurant scene hadn't gone unnoticed. The waiter who'd addressed me so warmly had sparked curiosity. A few of Clara's socialite friends had begun asking questions. Then someone had posted a photo. The manuscript I had received. It had been left with a local literary agent too. Unfinished, but remarkable, they had said. A new voice returning from silence. And my name had been mentioned in the acknowledgments. People were noticing. For once, not because of Clara, but because of me. It didn't sit well with her. By the weekend, she showed up at my apartment. No warning.
No, Ismail.
She pushed past me like she owned the threshold and started talking before I could ask her to leave. She accused me of embarrassing her, of pulling some sort of dramatic stunt at the restaurant to make her look bad. She said I had deliberately let the waiter call me by name to stir things up. I just watched her, let her spin. Then she saw the book. She picked it up, rifled through the pages. "Is this about you?" she asked, almost choking on the words. I said nothing. She laughed, bitterly. "You always had to make everything about yourself. You couldn't just let me have one evening without hijacking it. That's when I spoke. Calmly. Quietly. I told her the ring she mocked had belonged to someone who saw me more clearly than she ever had. That he had spent years remembering the smallest details about me, while she had spent years editing me out of family photos. She didn't respond at first. Just stood there, holding the manuscript like it was burning her fingers. Then she said something I'll never forget. You're not special. You just got lucky someone cared enough to make you feel like you were. And that's when I knew. She didn't hate me because I had taken the spotlight. She hated me because I hadn't needed hers to glow. She left without saying goodbye. I didn't stop her. I didn't feel the need to explain anything anymore. Not the book, not the gallery, not the ring, not the past. Because for the first time in a long time, I was building something no one could take away by pretending it never existed. The silence after Clara left was almost too loud. I stood in my living room, watching the door swing slowly back into place, the manuscript still lying open on the table. Her words lingered in the air like smoke. You're not special. You just got lucky someone cared enough to make you feel like you were. For someone who spent her whole life demanding attention, Clara had a strange talent for using invisibility like a weapon, turning it against you when you least expected it. That was her real power. Erasure. And for so long, I had let her. But not anymore. Later that night, as I poured myself a glass of water, my phone lit up with a call I didn't recognize. At first, I almost let it ring out, but something in me said to answer. On the other end was a woman's voice, calm, clipped, with that professional sharpness that meant business. She introduced herself as Cecilia Mays, director of the Whitmore Foundation. I blinked, confused. She said she had come across the manuscript. One of her interns had spotted it at the literary agency, and she wanted to know if I was, in fact, the woman referenced in it. She spoke of a potential fellowship, an artistic residency, something about honoring unspoken voices in art. My name had come up in their internal discussion more than once. Not because I was the writer, but because I was the muse. I had no idea what to say. I hadn't written a single word of that manuscript. I had only lived the parts that had been woven into it like thread no one expected to hold a pattern. But somehow it had held. It had reached people. And now, doors I had never knocked on were opening. I agreed to a meeting, cautiously. 2 days later, I sat in a quiet office on the 15th floor of a building I had passed 100 times but never noticed. Cecilia greeted me with warm eyes and a firm handshake. She didn't ask me to explain myself. She didn't make me justify my presence. She simply handed me a folder and said, "You have a voice. Whether you wrote the words or inspired them, we'd like to help you use it." Inside the folder was an outline of a fellowship program. It wasn't just for writers. It was for collaborators, storytellers, people who sparked ideas. I hadn't thought of myself as any of those things. Not in years. But as I sat there reading, a memory flickered, me at 17, standing in front of my English class, reading a poem I wrote about stillness and the way women disappear in plain sight. I had forgotten about that girl. But maybe she hadn't forgotten me. I told Cecilia I'd think about it. When I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Clara. She had posted something new. A photo from a charity event. Her in a white dress. Donovan beside her. Captioned, "When you build your life on truth, nothing can shake it." The irony made me laugh. But the comments told a different story. One read, "Didn't your sister design that ring Donovan gave you?" Another, "Funny how your sister's name is getting more attention than yours lately." And another, "You should give credit where it's due." Clara hadn't responded, but something told me she was spiraling. Her narrative was slipping. The one where she was always the golden child, the center, the story. For so long, I let her cast me as background noise. And now she didn't know what to do when people started listening to the silence I left behind. That night, I got a text from Donovan. Yes, Donovan. It was unexpected. We hadn't spoken much in the years he had been with Clara. A polite nod at family gatherings, a few dry remarks about wine pairings, but nothing more. His message was short. I need to talk. It's about Clara. And something you should probably know. I debated for a long time. My better judgment told me to ignore it. But my curiosity had been awakened too many times in the past few days to sleep now. We met at a small lounge near Midtown. Discreet. Quiet. He looked tired. Not just in the physical sense, but like someone who had been holding his breath in a room full of smoke for years. He sat down across from me, barely touching his drink. He said Clara had lied to him about the ring. Told him she had designed it herself. Showed him sketches she had traced from old notebooks. Claimed it was part of a private family tradition, an heirloom reborn. He had believed her. But then the night at the restaurant happened. And the waiter. And the note. Something hadn't added up. He had started asking questions. Quietly. And then he found it. A drawer in her office. Filled with things that didn't belong to her. Old sketchbooks. One of them had my name inside the cover. My handwriting. My initials on designs. Even a pressed flower I had kept between 2 pages. A blue aster from the year I visited Maine. He confronted her. She said I wouldn't miss it. That I didn't use it. That it wasn't theft, it was preservation. He said he didn't believe her. Not anymore. That's when he walked out. Now he sat across from me, apologizing, not for her, but for himself. For not seeing it sooner. For playing a part in something he hadn't questioned. For letting someone else claim what was never theirs. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how. But as I walked home that night, something clicked. The reason the manuscript mattered. The reason the gallery mattered. The reason the ring mattered. None of them were about grand gestures or vindication. They were about reclaiming small, quiet truths. The ones people like Clara tried to erase not by tearing them apart, but by polishing them until they no longer looked like you. By morning, another twist came. A reporter reached out. She said she was writing a feature on the resurgence of silent muses in modern storytelling, people who weren't the authors or the speakers, but the catalysts. Somehow, she had found my name connected to the manuscript and the gallery. And she wanted my side of the story. I paused before answering. But then I thought of every time Clara had spoken for me. Every time my story was filtered through her version. Every time I was present, but never acknowledged. I said yes. We met 2 days later. The reporter asked questions gently, never pushing. I told her about the ring, the sketchbooks, the note, the waiter. I told her about the disappearance and the reappearance. I told her about what it meant to be overlooked and what it means to step back into view without asking permission. She thanked me. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. A week later, the article went live. The title hit me in the gut. The ring, the muse, and the sister who tried to erase her. It wasn't cruel.
It wasn't gossipy.
It was true. The story traveled. People read it.
Commented. Shared.
And slowly, Clara's world began to shrink. Invitations rescinded. Sponsorships paused. Public sympathy evaporated. Not because people wanted to punish her, but because people could finally see me. That's when she called. And this time, I picked up. Her voice was different. Not cold. Not warm. Just stripped. She asked if we could meet. One last time. She said she wanted to return something. I agreed. We met at our mother's house. Neutral ground. The room was filled with old photographs, floral curtains, and the lingering smell of lemon polish. Clara walked in holding the sketchbook. My sketchbook. She placed it on the table.
Said nothing. Just looked at me.
I picked it up. Flipped through the pages. My handwriting. My drawings. My forgotten pieces. When I looked up, her eyes were glassy. I thought if I had your things, I could have your calm, she whispered. I said nothing. Because I finally understood. Clara didn't want attention. She wanted peace. But she didn't know how to earn it. So she took mine. And in doing so, she'd only made herself louder. And lonelier. I left without another word. Because some truths don't need to be spoken. Some truths are whole just by being seen. The days that followed were strange. Not quiet, more like suspended. As if the air around me was holding its breath, waiting to see which direction things would tilt next. I kept thinking the ripple would fade, that the article would be buried by the next trending scandal. But it didn't. It grew. The story had found a life of its own. People began reaching out. Former classmates, distant relatives, even strangers. Messages filled my inbox, some offering support, others telling me about their own stories of being erased, dismissed, overwritten by louder people in their lives. I read every single one. Some brought tears. Others just made me stare at the screen for long stretches, thinking about how many people lived in the quiet margins, waiting for someone to ask the right question. It didn't feel like fame. It felt like being heard. Then came the invitation. A panel at the State Museum, Invisible Women, Stories from the Shadows.
They wanted me to speak.
Not as a victim, but as a creator. I almost said no. I didn't know what I would say, how I would explain what it meant to be the inspiration behind someone else's art while simultaneously being denied your own spotlight. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how many people needed someone to say what they couldn't. And maybe it wasn't about perfect words. Maybe it was just about showing up. I accepted. And that's when the next twist came. The night before the panel, I received a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten letter slid under my apartment door. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from him, the artist, the writer, the man who had left the ring on my finger years ago and the manuscript in my hands only weeks before. I hadn't seen him since our meeting at Trenton's cafe. Not because of anger, but because there had been so much unsaid between us that silence had felt safer. Still, the letter pulled everything loose. He wrote about memory. How it deceives you into believing it can be rewritten, only to betray you by revealing what was always there. He wrote about leaving, about returning, about how he had spent so long trying to capture me in art because he had been too much of a coward to say the words out loud. Then, near the bottom, came a confession. The manuscript? It had been written with the hope I would hate it, that I would find it too raw, too selfish, that I would turn away, and he could finally let go. But I hadn't turned away, and that scared him more than anything, because it meant something in him still belonged to me. He ended the letter with a question. If I read this in time, would I come see him? He would be at the gallery, the one with the sculpture, at midnight. I didn't think. I just moved. By the time I arrived, the street was nearly empty. The gallery lights were off, but the door was cracked. I stepped inside. The sculpture was still there, the ring glinting faintly under the moonlight from the skylight above. And there he was, standing beside it, not smiling, not speaking, just waiting. I closed the door behind me. We didn't rush to fill the silence. Eventually he spoke. He told me he had received an offer from a foundation abroad. 6 months in Vienna. Full residency. Gallery access. Book deal. It was everything he had once dreamed of, back before everything fell apart. And he had planned to go. But now he wasn't sure. He looked at me then, and I realized he was afraid, not of leaving again, but of staying and not knowing what that meant. I told him something I hadn't even said to myself yet. I wasn't the same girl he had once left behind. And I wasn't asking him to stay. I was asking him to choose. Not because of guilt. Not because of what we had lost. But because of what we might still build, if either of us was brave enough to stop running from who we used to be. We didn't kiss. We didn't promise forever. But we stood there in the gallery, beside that sculpture of a memory neither of us could forget, and that was enough.
For now.
The next day, I stood on stage at the museum. The crowd wasn't large, but their eyes were fixed. I told them about the ring, the dinner, the gallery, the manuscript. I told them about the moment I realized invisibility wasn't about being unseen, it was about being misnamed. Sometimes people look at you and decide who you are. Sometimes they don't look at all. But every now and then, you get the chance to name yourself again. To write it down. To say it out loud. To stop shrinking. When I stepped off the stage, a woman in the front row handed me a note. It was from a publisher.
They wanted to speak.
Not about his manuscript. About mine. Apparently, someone from the panel had read an old op-ed I'd written in college. Found it powerful. Wanted to know if I had more. I didn't know how to answer at first. I hadn't written in years. But the thought didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt like a door I had forgotten was there. Later that week, I received another letter. This time from my mother. It was short. Almost awkward. She said she had read the article. Had seen the backlash Clara was facing. Had watched the panel online. She said she was proud. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to erase the years of silence. But it was something. And then came the final blow, something no one had expected. Clara disappeared. Not literally. Socially. She wiped her Instagram. Deleted her blog. Skipped charity events. Rumors spread. Some said she moved to another city. Others said she was regrouping. But I knew what had happened. She was grieving.
Not me.
Herself. The version of herself she had built on borrowed shine and stolen sketches. And maybe, in her own way, she was trying to figure out who she was without all of that.
I didn't reach out.
I didn't block her either. I just let her be. Because I had other things to do now. The gallery offered me a co-curator role. A fellowship came through from the Whitmore Foundation. And I started writing again. Essays, poems, even a short story that had nothing to do with her, with him, with any of it. Just me. On a Tuesday afternoon, I passed the restaurant where it all started. The one with the white tablecloths and the perfect lighting. I paused outside. Then, as if summoned, the same waiter stepped out on a break.
He saw me.
And smiled. No recognition this time. No note. Just a smile. It was enough. Because that moment wasn't about him seeing me anymore. It was about me seeing myself, and realizing I had finally arrived in a life I didn't need anyone else to narrate. Autumn settled in quietly. The kind of season that doesn't announce itself, but leaves small signs behind. Cooler air against your neck, a shift in the light, leaves drying at the corners. I found myself waking up earlier, not from obligation, but out of some strange inner rhythm that was finally beginning to feel like mine. My mornings were slower now, coffee brewed carefully, windows open just enough to let the breeze in, notebooks scattered across the table with half-formed thoughts written in the margins. I had taken the writing job. The publisher, who had reached out after the panel, had offered me a small contract, an essay series. I had said yes, half terrified and half electrified. My first draft was titled Belonged. I didn't explain the title. I let the piece do the explaining. Meanwhile, the gallery continued to evolve. What started as a silent tribute had turned into a living project, rotating art focused on unseen women, their objects, their voices. I co-curated the newest exhibit with Meline, the young designer who had once whispered, "Thank you," after seeing me reclaim my space at the Jade Vault Boutique. She had become something of a little sister to me. The kind who didn't try to steal your name, but helped you polish it quietly in the background. But just when I thought the story had found its resting place, the final ripple hit. It came on a rainy Wednesday. A small box, no return address, placed neatly at my doorstep. Inside, tucked in white silk, was a jade pendant. The same one from the beginning. Or so I thought. I lifted it, heart skipping, trying to make sense of it. Then I saw the inscription on the back. Still. No signature. Just that single word. And I understood.
He had gone.
Not out of rejection, but completion. Vienna. The residency. He had chosen to go not to escape, but to grow. And in doing so, he had left a final offering. A gesture. A punctuation mark at the end of a chapter that no longer needed to be rewritten. For the first time in years, I didn't feel left behind. I felt honored. The next twist came that weekend. I had gone to visit my mother, something I hadn't done in weeks. Not out of anger, just space. She greeted me differently this time.
No passive remarks. No comparisons.
Just a long, quiet hug. She didn't apologize. But she showed me something instead. She opened her jewelry box. Inside, where the fake family heirlooms had once sat, was the original sketch of the ring I had drawn years ago. The one Clara had stolen. The one I thought was lost. I found it in Clara's drawer, she said simply. She mailed it back. No note. Just this. I held the sketch in my hands like it was a fragile piece of time. My mother watched me. Then she said something soft, almost as if testing the shape of the words. You were always the brave one. I just didn't know how to raise brave. That sentence broke something open in me. Not in a painful way, but in a way that made room. I saw her then, not just as my mother, but as a woman who had been taught to keep the peace, even if it meant holding down the truth. She hadn't protected me because she hadn't protected herself. I didn't cry. I just nodded, and for the first time in years, we sat beside each other not as roles, but as people. As we were leaving, she handed me something else. A small envelope. It was from Clara. I took it home and waited 3 days to open it. When I finally did, the handwriting caught me off guard. It was clean, neat, like she had practiced. She said she had gone away for a while. Somewhere quiet. She was sorting out the noise. She didn't apologize, not directly. But she admitted something I hadn't expected. She wrote, I always wanted to be you, but I didn't know how. You made pain look noble. I made envy look polished. You wore silence like strength. I wore noise like armor. I don't know who I am without applause, but I'm trying to find out. I stared at those last words for a long time. I wasn't ready to respond. And maybe I didn't need to. Maybe she didn't write it for a reply. Maybe, like me, she just needed to say something out loud, so it stopped rotting inside her. Weeks passed. One afternoon, I visited the Jade Vault boutique again. Not for confrontation this time, but to see the new winter collection. I walked in, quietly. No grand entrance. No notes or cold stares.
Just me.
A new manager greeted me. She didn't know my story. She simply asked, Would you like help finding something? I smiled. No, I said. Just looking today. And for once, I meant it. As I browsed, I noticed something unexpected. A display labeled local designers. A small corner tucked near the consultation lounge. Inside the case was a delicate ring.
Silver.
Opal. Simple. And beside it a placard. Inspired by an unnamed muse who chose to be named after all. I didn't need confirmation. I knew the work. I knew the hands that made it. And I knew the moment that had inspired it. Before I left, I wrote something in the guest book near the entrance. Not a name. Just one word. Still. And I walked out, not into applause or vindication, but into clarity. Because the truth was this. I had never wanted to win. I had wanted to stop erasing myself to keep others comfortable. I had wanted the space to be soft without being invisible, to be known without being owned. And I had found that. In ink. In memory. In silence broken. In the quiet reclamation of my story. In my own name, spoken not with volume, but with certainty. That night, I returned to the old bookshop. The one where the manuscript had first appeared. The woman at the counter remembered me. You're the girl from a story, she said.
No, Iraplia, Smiling.
I'm the one who wrote the ending.